Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think we're going to give this a go. It's such a pleasure to welcome you to CICAN's Perspective Live, where we connect post-secondary leaders and experts on thought-provoking hot topics that matter to you. I'm your host, Catherine Clark, and on today's show, we'll be engaged in a great discussion on future-proofing international student recruitment. It's going to be a reflection on the challenges encountered and the lessons learned from the impact of COVID-19. And in just a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-host today, who is Peter Devlin, the president and CEO of Fanshawe College. He's also a member of CICAN's board of directors. And Peter's going to be engaging in a lively discussion with our guests. Those guests are Emma Meredith, the International Director of the Association of Colleges in the United Kingdom, and Craig Riggs, editor of the ICEF Monitor. We're really looking forward to that in, as I say, just a few short minutes. But of course, we all know that events of this nature are simply not possible without exceptional corporate sponsors. CICAN would like to recognize the ongoing contributions of Avis Budget, BGIS, Field Effect, and TD, who support so many of our activities, including bringing you Perspectives Live. Thank you to these organizations for their dedication to this important initiative. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the format for today's show, because we want to make it really clear that this isn't a standard webinar. Here at Perspectives Lives, we want to hear from your expert guests, but we also want to hear your perspectives on our discussion. And so to do that, we'll be using a digital tool called Slido. I know many of you may have heard of Slido. You may have used Slido in the past, probably given the current virtual context of every element of our lives. I am preaching to the converted here, but for those of you who haven't heard about Slido, I'm going to give you a little bit more info. So first of all, I encourage you to type the following address into your browser, no matter what kind of device you're using. The address is www.slido, that's SLIDO.com. And you'll be asked to put in the hashtag for this event, which is hashtag Perspectives Live. And then you're all set. You're part of the conversation. Slido really is going to be an essential tool for us. And here's why. It lets you ask questions. It lets you like questions that have been posed by others. And it also allows you to take part in the informal polling that we'll be doing as part of the show. So it makes this show and this conversation truly interactive, and that's exactly what we're aiming to achieve. Peter and his guests will have their conversation, but I encourage you to type your questions into Slido as they occur to you during their conversation, because once they're finished with their portion of the conversation, I'll be directing your questions to Peter and his guests in the final segment of our show today. And we are going to try to get to as many as we can. But we're going to give Slido a test. We're going to give it a try right now. We'll begin with a simple polling question. It's actually not so simple. It has about 4 potential answers, so here you go. With COVID-19 changing the landscape of international student recruitment, where do you think colleges and institutes should focus their efforts to ensure success in the 2021-2022 academic year? Here are your options. A, targeted communication strategies. B, improving the quality of online delivery as a differentiator. C, diversifying their international student recruitment strategies. Or D, increasing student support services. So those are your options. It's your time to vote. And then in a moment, we'll come back to this and we'll see how you feel. And we'll bring that into our discussion as well. And now I am absolutely delighted to be joined by CICAN President and CEO, Denise Amiot. Hello, Denise, welcome.
Hello, Catherine. It's nice to have you with us.
Oh, I'm absolutely thrilled to be a part of this. And, you know, I thought, Denise, that probably an important way for us to begin this conversation together today is for me to invite you to acknowledge the First Peoples on whose traditional territories we live and work, because I know that CICAN is really very deeply committed to recognition and to respect. Those are essential elements of establishing healthy reciprocal relationships, and they're also key to reconciliation.
Absolutely. Alors, bonjour à tous. Hello, everyone. It's great that you're taking the time to participate in today's Perspectives Live episode. So, as Catherine mentioned, I want to acknowledge that the land on which we are hosting our virtual show is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. But today is also a special day, so I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge that March 11th has been designated by the Government of Canada as National Day of Observance to commemorate the people who lost their lives and the significant impacts we all have felt because of COVID-19.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning that, Denise, because boy, what a year it has been. And I think a lot of us today have been reflecting on where we were 1 year ago when a global pandemic was declared and just how fundamentally our lives changed in about a 48-hour period. And we're very grateful, as you've noted, to have the opportunity to commemorate this unfortunate anniversary and to celebrate healthcare workers and frontline workers who've really helped us survive through the past year. Now, Denise, I'd also like to take a few minutes to chat with you about your thoughts around the topic of international student recruitment. This is a really important issue to CICAN.
Absolutely, Catherine. I have to say we've talked about international students for the entire year. There's not a single week where there was not something else that was popping up. So, and it does remain a major focus for our members from across the country. And you know, Catherine, for close to 50 years, Colleges and Institutes Canada has championed education, training, and innovation on a global scale. Currently, we coordinate 111 major programs in 15 countries around the world for close to 200 million Canadian dollars. And those projects, they have provided colleges and institutes leaders, faculty, and also students meaningful global exposure and relevant Canadian experiences. And Canadian colleges and institutes, they are internationally recognized as leaders in higher education. Why? Because it's practical and it's career focused. And as the national and international voice of Canada's colleges and institutes, CICAN works with the federal government to improve policies and create programs that facilitate student mobility and the recruitment of international students. Just for example, at the end of 2018, there were 212,000 study permit holders at the college and institute level across Canada.
Yeah, and I mean, you talked a little bit, Denise, also about the impact. Sorry, Denise, I'm not sure if we're...
Yeah, that's good.
Wait, okay. You talked a little bit about the impact that this is having on your members. I mean, you said that from the second that we had a declaration of a global pandemic, you know, it's a term we hear a lot. We use the term pivot, adapt. We've basically, you know, those have become ingrained in our vocabulary this year. But you had to do that. Your members had to do that. Can you talk to us a little bit about how your association and your members have addressed this?
Absolutely, Catherine. So, of course, with the arrival of COVID-19 last March, our members were confronted with a scenario in which resources were limited and the conventional methods of international student recruitment were severely constrained. There was no playbook for that. And with travel and health restrictions in place, it meant that our colleges and institutes, they had to step in to engage and support international students in new and innovative ways, while at the same time reassuring markets around the world that this sector could weather the pandemic. And guess what? We've done this by working tirelessly over the past year with policymakers, immigration officials, private sector, various levels of government to keep the focus on access and student support. That was our priority all along. And globally now, as vaccine distribution speeds up and lockdowns slowly lift, we're starting to focus on how the education sector will look once the world returns to some type of normality, and especially how the fall will look like. So today's show is in fact focused on this topic. We're here to reflect on how international student recruitment has fared during the pandemic, while contemplating the future of the sector in a post-COVID-19 world. And looking to the future, we can see that this sector will continue to be very competitive. And when we look at our numbers, this is what they are showing already. And Canada is in an advantageous moment as the country maintains a positive outlook towards international students, being the future of Canadian immigration and supporting local economies and contributing to the fabric of our country. So today, we certainly welcome these discussions. We have great guests, and we will hear from two students also on their own international experience. So I look forward hearing our speakers and also your questions, you, the audience, and the comments as the show proceeds. Back to you, Catherine.
Merci, Denise. That was a really terrific way to set the stage for the conversation that we're about to have, and impressive work that you and your organization have been doing on this front. And as Denise noted, we really do want to ensure that your questions are incorporated into this conversation through Slido. And I want to remind all of you that we'd love for you to vote on the polling question that we asked right off the top. And we'll get to your questions just as soon as the conversation between Peter Devlin and his guests wrap up. But now let me officially welcome my esteemed co-host, Peter Devlin, who is the president and CEO of Fanshawe College and a member of the CICAM Board of Directors. He's joining us from London, Ontario. Hello, Peter.
Catherine, great to see you. Thanks for the special opportunity to co-host alongside you.
Well, I am just thrilled. And, you know, we were talking off the top, Peter, that a year ago today was the declaration of a global pandemic. And then swiftly following that, international borders were closed in an effort to contain the pandemic. And along with closed borders, the prospects of work and study overseas were put in jeopardy for so many students. Even now, and Denise mentioned this a little bit, lockdown, distancing measures, those are still in place in a lot of parts of this country and around the world. And many colleges and institutes here have been challenged to think of new ways to maintain and to engage international student recruitment. So let's talk about your perspective, Peter. How will the international student experience differ in the future from how we used to operate? And how can Canadian post-secondary institutes modify their value proposition so that they remain attractive destinations for students from around the world?
Thanks, Catherine. First, I have to say that I love international students. There are 7,000 international students studying at Fanshawe College from over 100 different countries. From my point of view, they bring different culture, different language, different approaches, and they enrich the student experience at all of our campuses. I think Canada is super attractive. We provide a warm welcome. I think that we are committed to just a wonderful level of academic quality. And we have career services that support networking and employment opportunities for students. As we look to the future, though, the International Student Recruitment Challenge is one that is going to be tough. It's one that's based on relationships, and so I think it will be important for us to have more personalized relationships with prospective students, for us to have the ability to use different platforms, and to be swift in how we cater to student demand, student needs, all important conversations that we're about to have, Catherine.
Yes, that's really great insight, Peter. And, you talked about the student element, and Denise mentioned that we'd be hearing from some students as well. And we're going to do that now. I want to turn to a couple of videos because this past week we had the pleasure of interviewing two students on their experiences with today's topic. And those students are Yasmin Arslan, who is studying industrial engineering technology at Nova Scotia Community College, and also Sahajdeep Singh, a student in business technology management at Red River College. So let's roll those videos now to hear their perspectives.
Oh, actually, the first reason is that quality of the education in Canada. And the second and another most important reason is that I heard around the people and how Canadian people are welcoming and friendly. As we are planning to change our countries totally, it was really important for us that how we will be welcoming. So, and also another reason we would like to really live in Canada, and that's why we believe that studying college in Canada could help us to build a better career in here. It's more than I expected, to be honest. It's better than I expected. Of course, there's some difficulties, but generally, I was, especially for my college, I could say, I was really afraid that how instructor will be, interact with the international students. How is there any differences between Canadian students and international students? But I'm really glad that I'm really thankful to my instructor. They are really helped us. So even this is a basic for many people. For us, we are coming here like a baby, and we are learning everything from beginning. So, and I'm thankful that my all instructor and school and SEC supporting us in each and every aspect. Difficult for me, it's staying away from my family. Mm-hmm. This is the most difficult things for me. And to be honest, while applying a study permit, it was really challenging. So now people want to come to the Canada. Really, it's Turkish people are really interested, and they want to find a way to come and study here. It's a really big. It is a risk to change your country totally. You need to really get your encourage and to move your country. So I'm feeling myself more strong, and feeling myself even I'm student right now. I'm feeling myself successful already. This brings me much more courage, and self-confidence. And I think if you believe yourself, you can do anything what you want.
Yasmin, I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much.
Really, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
It's been about 2 years now. I will complete 2 years with Red River College this year, and hence in Canada. To start with, I think initially it was really a challenge to even get around the city without knowing much about getting from point A to B, not having a personal vehicle. I was busing a lot. That was one big challenge, that I did not know how to break the ice where I wanted to interact with people, but I was somehow lacking the knowledge of the local slang and the culture. That was one part. The other part was I did not know where to start networking and go about employment, because that's one thing every international student aspires to be, to look for a job and an employment in the field that they are pursuing their studies in. So that was another challenge. I think I was really curious to know where should I start and how do I go about it. Most of the international students, they kind of turn their blind eye towards the kind of support system college has, just because everything going around is so overwhelming. But kudos to the instructors. They put in a lot of effort to make students aware about what all support system is put in place for international students. Um, while just talking to one of my instructors, that I feel lost, I don't know what to do, I don't have anything common to talk about. Whenever I feel like I can talk about, I try to keep myself, I hold myself back. That's when I discovered that Red River College has so much to offer. To start with, I became a part of Intercultural Mentorship Program. It's a program which aims towards giving the opportunity to international students pair up with one of the local students. I was paired up with one of the localites who was born and raised in Winnipeg, and he basically took care of me in a way that we used to hang out together. We used to go around places. Then they have another program under Canadian Connections program, in which they keep on organizing daily events. So every bi-weekly, they have one session with a particular aim to throw some light on employment, how to succeed in the courses you have. A new program came out by Red River College that was 10,000 coffees. So that program aims towards connecting current students to the college alums who have already passed out of college. And there's a really interesting story to it. I had my summer job sorted out, but due to COVID, I could not pursue it. But then I did not give up, and my instructors were always motivating me to go and network virtually because of COVID, right? That's the new normal. And I was matched up with one of the senior managers of a credit union, who eventually helped me recommend to his fellow entrepreneurs and in different companies, where I was able to get a job in my own field. So that's the power of networking and the kind of things Red River College has put in place. So they've already provided me so much to interact with college alumni, so that we can maintain a stronger bond.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sid.
Well, Peter, those are some interesting conversations.
They sure were. I found it fascinating how there's an importance on academic quality, on how Canada's just this great place to study, and student services are also important aspects.
Yeah, and I think it's just so important to be able to have that student perspective as a part of the conversation as well, because they're giving us a ground level sense of what they're going through and their reasons for wanting to study with Canadian colleges and institutes. So, what we're going to do now is we're going to turn things over to you to bring in your guests, because we're really looking forward to this conversation. And why don't I say that the screen is yours?
Perfect. All right. Catherine, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be able to welcome our guests. Firstly, who is the International Director of the Association of Colleges of the United Kingdom, as well as Craig Riggs, who is the editor of ICEF Monitor. Welcome, Meredith. Welcome, Craig. Thank you so much for joining CI Can and our Perspectives live show this afternoon.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for having us.
So, in one foul swoop, the COVID-19 completely changed how higher education institutions around the world have had to approach international student recruitment. What's your assessment of how colleges and institutes have dealt with the challenges introduced by the pandemic over the course of the past year or so? And perhaps, Craig, I can begin with you.
Yeah, sure, Peter. I think, this is not a secret to anybody on this on the show today, but I think Canada's colleges and institutes have always distinguished themselves as very agile and adaptable institutions, and certainly those are qualities that have been really tested over the last year, to say the least. And I think certainly every institution has responded to the pandemic within its own distinct context. But if I can generalize about it, I think that colleges and institutes have demonstrated a lot of imagination and a lot of resilience in very quickly adapting programs for online delivery. And I think they did so with the additional challenge that college programs are often characterized by applied learning, by very hands-on learning. And so they're the additional challenge of how to bring that experience into the online space. And to take just one example of that, and I think we could cite many across the country, Centennial College in Scarborough, as of fall 2020, had specifically redesigned 50 complete programs for online delivery, not just to bring those programs fully online for remote learning, but to accommodate students in a variety of time zones around the world. And I think that flexibility and speed to market is truly remarkable. It's not to say it was easily done or done without bumps. There were lots of lessons learned along the way, but I think by any measure, that's a tremendous response. And then your own college, Peter, Fanshawe, I think has always distinguished itself with its international team and its innovation in international recruitment, its commitment to substantial events and familiarization tours on campus. And just this month, we saw that you carried out the Fanshawe Worldwide Fair, which was a very ambitious virtual event and reaching out to global markets on behalf of the college. And I think it's that kind of innovation and commitment that reflects the response that we're seeing in colleges across the country.
Online or hybrid and blended learning, and maybe an increased acceptance and use of innovation within the curriculum, with use of technology. And I think the pandemic has probably forced staff in colleges to have to maybe develop their technology skills if they didn't have them before. And that's an asset now in terms of CPD. And equally for students, I think the pandemic and online engagements probably enable colleges to reach a greater proportion of students, whether they're domestic or actually based overseas.
Okay, interesting. Still with you, Emma, the international students in many countries, certainly here at home in Canada, are now allowed to complete their entire studies online from abroad. How can colleges and institutes provide meaningful country-specific experiences for those international students? And what do you see as the role for associations like yours and CICANS?
Well, it's a very similar position here in the UK that very quickly after the onset of the pandemic last year, our Home Office that deals with immigration, they brought in concessions to allow institutes that sponsor international students to allow those students to study online, because they recognised that, you know, remote study was going to be the only possibility. It was going to be very difficult to travel. So that's been in place now for over a year. I think it's really helped continuity of engagement for institutes with their international students. And I think, you know, even though we're fortunate that we're able to use the technology in this day and age to keep up with the learning, keep up with the delivery to students, I think feedback we get from members and from students is that there's still no real substitute for face-to-face. It's completely different learning online. So I think it's a real challenge for institutes to give that sort of cultural experience to their students if they're not able to attend in person. But our members have been, and I'm sure yours as well in Canada, have been doing all sorts of things to keep students engaged, to introduce them to Canadian culture and British culture. And I think, you know, the idea of inclusion and support and supporting students with their mental health through this difficult period with COVID has been very important. So colleges have had to find innovative ways to support their students online. And I think in the short term, that's not going to change. And to answer your point about what can we do as associations to help, I think one of the things that we've set up this year for our colleges that are engaged in international work is almost like a community of practice, to bring colleges together, practitioners, to share what they're doing, to swap tips and exchange ideas and challenges. And I think that's been very helpful to colleges because they've been able to know, you know, it's not just us that are having this issue, or to exchange an idea that's then gone on to help another college in how it supports the students.
Yes, it is fascinating how every single student is unique, different, has their own needs to be able to allow their future path to be defined. And it's I think that your role is quite similar to what I see happening with CICAN here. Craig, your thoughts on this particular topic?
Oh, I would say ditto, I think, to that. I really agree with everything that Emma said. It's in terms of to take the question in reverse order, in terms of a role for CICAN or any like associations and other destinations, I think that role of sharing lessons learned and best practices amongst the membership is really, really key. The situation obviously has unfolded very quickly and continues to change a great deal over this past year and now for the year to come. And I think that all the more important for us to have moments like this where we can come together and share ideas and share lessons learned. I think that's a huge role for any association to play. But in terms of how to support students that are engaged in remote learning, I think a lot of this comes down to encouraging and supporting real human connections during that learning experience. You know, it's both you know, in terms of what happens in class or in interactive studios or labs that the students are participating in, but also that support service that Emma referred to outside of class. We see this consistently across international education this year, between faculty and students, amongst colleagues, amongst international partners. There is ever more need to kind of lean into all of those relationships. Everyone is looking for a lot of support, a lot of reassurance, a lot of information. And this places a lot of demands on colleges and institutes, I think, throughout this year. You know, students are looking for more support, more reassurance, more information than ever before. And I think it's through those efforts, through formal and informal support services and supports for students, that human connection can be encouraged and can be maintained throughout a remote learning experience.
Thanks, Craig. Let me just, so you talked about the relationship that students have with their institutions. You talked about an evolving need. I'm curious about what institutions can do as student needs change, as their expectations change, looking to a new academic year and beyond. What's the role for colleges and institutes? And do you think that COVID will actually provide us a launch pad or help accelerate innovation inside our institutions, specifically focused at how we attract international students and we make ourselves future-proof?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a great question. I think that without doubt at all, I mean, COVID obviously is a massive challenge and a massive disruption in international education. But I think it's also being increasingly seen as an accelerator for change and for some of the trends that we're developing more slowly otherwise. You know, COVID obviously has now had an amplifying effect on those. So we had a story on ICEF Monitor this week that was looking at the rapid growth in enrollment on major online learning platforms, you know, in terms of individual institutions, platforms like Coursera, for example, but you know, looking across all of the major MOOC platforms like Coursera and edX and other major open platforms like that. Most of those have been in place now for the better part of a decade, but a third of like the total enrollment across all those platforms last year was made up of students that joined during the pandemic, that went to those short courses, those stackable credentials. And I mean, those platforms were gaining traction, that online learning was becoming more of a mainstream experience for teaching and learning across sectors is not a new idea. But just to see that dramatic growth in enrollment last year in those platforms alone is, I think, really telling about the demand for online learning experiences and the demand for alternative credentials in the marketplace more broadly. So I think there are lots of lessons there for us. I think there are also lots of indications coming in early student research now about how student expectations and attitudes are changing towards education. And as we go through the pandemic and out of the pandemic and into recovery afterwards, I think we can expect a lot more emphasis on student support services, a lot more emphasis on and reassurance needed on the part of both students and families with respect to public health and safety measures in whatever destination they're heading for. I think we can expect a lot of emphasis on flexibility in admissions and payment terms, a lot more attention given to affordability for students from many markets than has been the case in the past. And I think we can expect a lot, even more focus. This is not a new idea for colleges and institutes, certainly, but I think we can expect a great deal of attention on employment supports and employment outcomes for students that are coming through programs. You know, that return on investment from the educational experience will be ever more key. And supports that help students to make that transition, like the examples we heard from the students just a moment ago, I think will, not that they haven't been important before, but you can just draw a sharp line under all of those things. I think they will be even more important as we move through the pandemic now.
Okay. Fascinating, Craig. Thank you. Emma, over to you for your thoughts on how we future-proof international student attraction and recruitment.
I mean, I think I would agree with much of what Craig just said. I think he covered it very well, and I think it goes back to the first Slido question as well from this discussion about the different ways in which institutes may wish to future-proof and protect their international recruitment. And I think one of the answers was communication, which I think is going to be key. It's how institutions communicate with their students, parents, sponsors, agents, and so on, and that they're giving enough information about the COVID measures they're taking, what it's like to be in Canada or in the UK at the moment, the things they need to think about before they travel, or whether they're going to be studying online, what that experience is going to be like once they're online. And I think we still have some challenges around online delivery. I think, as Craig said, COVID is an accelerator for change. But I think it's certainly in terms of our roles in the UK and Canada as colleges that offer technical education, I think we still have work to do around the vocational programs and how they can truly be delivered online. Some of the assessments are very practical. It's difficult to replicate that online. So I think we have to think about that side of the experience and the kinds of courses that we're recruiting international students to. I also think, there are considerations for long-term courses versus short-term courses. In the UK, I think our summer school and English language course market's taken a real hit with COVID because it's been so difficult for students to get here for short-term courses. And there are a lot of very low-cost online English language learning providers, so that the market is also competitive as well. So I think it's really the institutions focusing on what they can offer, whether it's online or in person, that really is unique, and how they can support their students to get their qualification.
Okay, thanks, Emma. So I hear that there will be great competition. I hear that the student is being put at the center of how we attract them. They're unique. They have family needs, health needs, and they're after quality schooling that leads to work, and how we provide them with the career services and the prospective employment opportunities are all central to how we will be ready for and somewhat uncertain tomorrow. It would be interesting to get the results of the Slido survey that was done earlier. So, Catherine, are you able to share that with us?
Yes, I think they're going to pop the results up on the screen for us there, and hopefully we can all see them. Can you see the results there, Peter, as well? You barely can?
Barely can.
I know. I might need my glasses.
Oh, there you go.
In fact, I think I shall. So the results with COVID-19 changing the landscape of international student recruitment, where do you think colleges and institutes should focus their efforts to ensure success in the 2021-2022 academic year? And 48% of you, so the greatest number of you, think that the focus should be put into diversifying their international student recruitment strategies. So, you know, that makes sense, of course, and given what you've just been talking about in your discussion, because, you know, the path forward is to find, frankly, new paths, to rely on some of the old ones that have worked and can continue to work in this new global context, but also to find new ways of doing things to ensure success.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Peter, did you want us to launch into some of the Slido questions that we have now for you and for your guests?
I think that would be wonderful, Catherine.
Okay.
It's great. One of the special features of the Perspectives Live here is to engage our audience, and so we would welcome that very much.
Okay, super duper. Well, then I'm gonna throw these questions out to you based on what I have here at the top of my screen, and I'm pretty much looking at what you're looking at. So this is a question for Emma and Craig. What do you think students are using as a differentiator in this new normal when searching for a country or a school to study in? Emma, why don't we start with you?
It's a really good question, and I'm sure, you know, Craig's organisation and others might be doing some detailed forecasting, looking at the patterns that are changing in what matters to students. But I think a really interesting differentiator is just perceptions around maybe safety and security on the back of COVID, because if you take the UK, for example, I mean, our statistics on COVID have been fairly grim. Yet, you know, the vaccination program is really moving at pace, and we've never really shut our borders. In fact, at the present time, it's actually the most difficult to get into the country versus how it was, you know, all the way through the first year of the pandemic. So I think it's going to be really interesting to look at what students think about how safe is it for me to go to this country to travel. And I wonder whether that might start for some students to trump affordability, because there are other countries that have, you know, pretty much closed their border but have very few COVID cases that are very attractive destinations. But how easy will it be to get there? So I wonder whether availability of courses, ease of access to a country is actually going to start to become quite a key factor for students, particularly if they're hesitating between a couple of countries and one happens to have an easier, if you like, entry policy, and that's the one they're going to take.
That's a really interesting point, Emma. Craig, it would be great to hear your thoughts on this as well.
I think that's exactly correct. The students in the immediate will be quite focused on practical considerations. Can they enter the country that they're considering? You know, in terms of, I mean, and what determines that? Travel restrictions, border closures, flight availability, visa processing, all of those basic considerations are weighing, you know, heavily in students' decision making right now. Add to that the availability of in-person learning, right? It's very clear that that's a huge factor for students as they're considering destinations or possibly considering switching destinations. Students will switch, research tells us quite clearly, will switch for the opportunity to study in person. And so this correlates back to the public health response the relative strength of public health response from country to country, the incidence and persistence of COVID outbreaks throughout the country, the success and the progress of vaccination efforts. These are all now factors that things obviously we never used to think about terribly. Obviously safety, student safety was always a huge feature of destination choice. But now we see that through a completely different lens, which is COVID and to what extent students can be reassured or protected against COVID or against disruption from COVID outbreaks in a destination. So I think all of those factors weigh very heavily indeed.
Peter, a question that I'm going to direct to you because it relates specifically to Fanshawe. How is Fanshawe approaching work integrated learning opportunities during COVID?
Thanks. We've been very adaptive, working with strong and leaning on the strong industry and business relationships that we enjoy in the region. So some of those we've been able to achieve those remotely, and some in a face-to-face way. It's an important aspect, particularly for international students. International students are very savvy. And I think it's important, Catherine, that we emphasize the fact that learning is anchored on a social element, and so people need people to be able to enhance their learning. And some of the placement opportunities that augment learning are really important to provide the network growth and a fuller understanding of the career opportunities that international students have.
Craig, a question. I mean, we've kind of talked a little bit around this, but where should colleges and institutes be looking for new international student recruitment right now?
So in terms of new markets, I mean, I think if we look at where students are coming from now, obviously it's very well established that the majority of students in Canada, more than half, are coming from India, from China. And then you can add a second tier of sending markets below that, Vietnam, Iran, France, Colombia among them. Certainly some of those markets like Vietnam, Colombia, Iran, those have all been, we would identify those as important emerging markets or important growth markets for student recruitment. And I think there are no shortage of important targets in different regions around the world, in the Middle East, in Africa, in Latin America, and certainly in South Asia as well, where we see considerable opportunity for growth for exactly the types of programs that are being offered by colleges and institutes here in Canada. So I think as to how an individual institution would prioritize those, I mean, I think it's a function of a variety of things, how any new or emerging markets fit in relation to your current strategies in markets where you're already established. If you're very strong in Asia and you're conducting missions to the region already, relatively straightforward then to add perhaps some additional targets in South Asia to that mix, or the same if you're beginning to build a footprint in Latin America. Certainly there are a number of promising targets in Latin America that could be added to sort of expand and further diversify your efforts there. But I think that the key for any institution is really to make that commitment, to make that investment in diversifying and the international enrollment further. We will see a lot of shifts in the competitive landscape after COVID. We will see, for example, a much stronger impetus towards intra-regional mobility. Students from Asia, for example, let's say students from India studying at other countries within Asia, as opposed to going to more traditional destinations around the world, the UK, the US, Canada, Australia. And so that sets up a different competitive dynamic than we're used to, right? That's a trend that we've been following for several years. But again, COVID as an amplifier or as an accelerator, I think we can all understand that trend towards regional mobility is likely to accelerate after COVID. And so the landscape is changing quickly, and the need to diversify enrollment is, I think, an ever more pressing and real consideration for any institution today.
So We have time for a couple more questions. And Emma, I found this one really interesting. I mean, we're all coming to this conversation from, well, many of us are coming from different time zones. And this question is, do we need to eliminate class times and go with asynchronous learning? What do you think about that in terms of as a recruitment tool?
I think it's a really interesting proposition, and I think the answer really sort of comes down to each individual college's capacity, really, and looking at the kind of geographies that their students are coming from. And many colleges, I think, will have perhaps been, for their international learners, if they can't teach in the same time zone as the student is in, then perhaps everything is pre-recorded. The students can access it at another time. And we've been doing some work at AOC looking at the response to COVID in a number of different countries, and some institutions have made their uploads available for 24 hours a day, so that students can download things at different times. So I think it has to evolve in the way that maybe the live lesson, and assuming that you have 100% student attendance online, that we're probably going to need to move away from that if we haven't already, in order to really reach out to students in different markets who have different demands, different needs, in addition to different time zones.
I'm going to get you to take a stab at this next question too, and then I'd briefly like both Craig and Peter's thoughts on it before we wrap up this portion of the conversation. But has Canada and the UK's COVID strategy posed any brand risks for colleges and institutes that are engaging in international student recruitment? What, from a UK perspective?
I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier about the perceptions of how institutions and countries have managed COVID. How have they dealt with it? How open have they been? I think in the UK we have possibly an additional challenge of leaving the EU. That's also happened over the last year. So I think perceptions can be very mixed, certainly of the UK, in terms of what it means now for the UK not to be part of the European Union. Does it mean that we've closed ourselves off, or does it mean that we've opened up and become more global and that we haven't become as Eurocentric? So I think there are different dimensions to that question, and I think probably what institutions and the associations like CCAN and ourselves can do is work closely with governments, with all of those who promote international education, to show that we remain open and committed and welcoming to international students. And I think the messaging is very, very important around that.
Craig?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that countries have continued to send really significant market signals throughout the pandemic. Some of that is in the form of official policy. Some of it is just the behavior of governments and institutions, and how that how that influences student perception. I mean, perhaps Australia is the best example of this, where Australian borders have been closed, remain closed to international students today, and the signals that have come from the national government there have not been positive. The Prime Minister famously said at one point, Prime Minister of Australia, that is, famously said at one point that international students, just basically invited international students to go home if they couldn't support themselves during the crisis in Australia, and that was to the collective dismay of international educators in Australia, and to say the least. And it continues to echo in markets around the world, that sentiment, and it continues to overshadow the considerable efforts of state governments and individual institutions in Australia to provide a great deal of support for international students during the crisis. But just that kind of signal can carry a great deal of weight, and I think there is a reputational cost to how you conduct yourself in the middle of a crisis like this.
Well, Craig and Emma, I want to thank you both very much for your time and for sharing your thoughts with us. It's been deeply appreciated, fascinating discussion, lots of insights as well that you've shared. And now I'm going to ask Denise Amiou to join us on screen one last time, because I'd like to hear, Peter, from you and from Denise really briefly on your final thoughts as we close out this event today. Why don't we start with you?
Thanks, Catherine. I just would like to follow up by saying, while each college and institute is proud of their brand and the reputation they have internationally. It certainly comes underneath a national umbrella. We're fortunate that ours is the red maple leaf. It's powerful, and I think it's important for all of us, particularly our leadership, to understand the essential contribution international students make to both our nation's immigration agenda as well as for economic growth. Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you, Peter and Denise.
So I want to echo what Peter has said. I think Canada has shown how open and supportive it was to its international students. And Sajin Hit of India mentioned it. He talked about the human contact and the fact that colleges found ways to ensure that despite the fact that everything was online, there were ways to connect. I say chapeau, heads off to the colleges in Canada, and heads off also to the federal government for supporting our requests to support international students, because this is something we're looking at short-term, not short-term, but mid-term and long-term. So, and we love international students, as Peter said at the beginning, and we want to continue to welcome them, and hopefully a number of them will decide to make Canada their country.
Well, thank you, Denise, for those final comments. Thank you also, Peter, for being my able co-host, and of course to our guests, Emma Meredith and Craig Riggs, who are popping back on screen, I think, as we say a warm thank you also to you, ladies and gentlemen, for being a part of our conversation today. I want to remind everyone to register for CICAN's annual Connection Conference. That's taking place April 22nd. That's just next month. And on that note, don't miss the bilingual episode of Perspectives Live on Wednesday, April 14th. It'll be highlighting key content and guest speakers from the 2021 conference. It'll be a bit of a sneak peek of what's in store. But until that time, ladies and gentlemen, stay healthy, stay safe. We look forward to seeing you next time.